or you can't circumvent it. That's how it works. So in lieu of not having a coordinator, you've absolutely broken every rule, regulation, statute, and everything by saying, well, we're not going to have a coordinator until we do it. And obviously, I respect Mr. Kenkrow's position that when Mr. Ndurko resigns, there's going to be another one put in. Obviously, the mayor has the right to appoint. However, you're creating an ordinance before it has to be created. And in my opinion, it shouldn't be created. The importance to the people, even though they're not first responders, is still the trust or the brain trust on knowing what has to happen. And Mr. Ndurko's been, or Captain Ndurko's been here many times talking about the importance of energy management in that position. And he's spoken here most eloquently about it. So I'm a little perplexed on why we're pushing the ordinance through when, quite honestly, we don't have to. So I would humbly, respectfully ask the council either to delay this until you have all the ducks in a row, or just deny it and protect the residents of Edison, because that's what this is all about. Our first responders are always there. And we know the problems that we have because there's a lot of them that now live out of Edison. And if there's an emergency, and we don't ever want to see another emergency like we did with Durham Woods. We never want to see that. But to have people driving here to try to go crazy to get here with an hour and a half speeding on the highways doesn't help the immediate situation. Somebody who lives within the bounds of Edison does. And that means more to the people of Edison and the public than creating an ordinance saying you can live anywhere you want. Again, I don't see the sense of the ordinance at this particular point in time. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Walke?
Lois Walke, 10 Peak Road, Edison. I thank Mr. Karavinchik for bringing us up to snuff on some of the history and the legal problems with this. And I hope that no one moves on this until our township attorney can look this up and see whether or not we are moving legally. And I have to say, if this ever gets passed, I hope we never have a disaster in Edison, because if this is passed, there are going to be a lot of guilty consciences on this council. I, as a resident, feel very vulnerable not having emergency management people living within the township. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walke. Anyone else? Do we have a motion to close the public session?
Motion to close the public session.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Do we have a motion to adopt?
Motion to adopt.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Council comments?
Council President?
Yes, ma'am?
I just want to say that as far as my research has been conducted in terms of what this agency actually does, and it's to develop a strategic plan that then makes the first responders that they implement. It's strategy. It's all about having the plan in place, having the necessary strategic organizational structure in place, and I feel as if the township would not be endangered by having this individual sit outside of the town, especially with technology and with all the other capabilities that we now do have. I will also make the caveat that this was implemented in December of 2007, prior to the caveat of having someone be a resident in the town from 2003, when this organization was established, or this arm of the organization was established. It was not a caveat. So it operated for 4 years without having the caveat of someone having to reside in the town. So again, I feel as if it's all about strategy, having the capabilities and expertise of the individuals in those positions supersedes where they reside as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Other council comments?
Council President?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, if no one else wants to speak at this point. On Tuesday, I asked several times what would happen if we did not have an emergency management coordinator, and we had 3 deputies, and Mr. Cancro's response, and this is just paraphrasing, but basically was that when the mayor felt the need, he would then make an appointment. And he's changed his story a little bit tonight. That's not what he was insisting on Tuesday. And I asked at the time, how can you have a deputy? What would he be a deputy to, or who would he be a deputy to if there is no coordinator? So that still kind of hangs in the balance. Former Councilmember Karabenchek brought up an excellent point. When we had a storm, I guess it was last year, and the gentleman who lives out of town, the deputy who does not live in Edison, was not allowed to come into our community. He had to stay in Island. He happens to be a member of the fire department. I don't know what his capacity is, but he was not allowed to come to Edison. Now, he was the deputy, and I heard he had wonderful qualifications, and that's great, but he was in Island. At the time, our coordinator lived in Edison, so we didn't have a problem. So now if our coordinator moves out and he becomes a deputy, so now you have the gentleman from Island who cannot come here for an emergency. Then you have the new deputy who cannot come here probably, well, I understand from what I understand, he's going to be at least an hour, perhaps an hour and a half away. By the time he gets here, I mean, it could be a disaster. Mr. Cancro also said, and Councilwoman Perelstein made the argument that this is strategic and it's coordinated, and Mr. Cancro said they sit in the room upstairs and they plan a strategy. And if there's an emergency, they're not going out to the site, they're going to be sitting upstairs. But if they're not here in Edison, how are they going to get upstairs? I don't understand that. I would like to see that all of our deputies, and I realized that there was not the caveat of a deputy residing in Edison because our coordinator lived in and continues to live here in Edison, our former coordinator. Mr. Anderko, Captain Anderko, lived here in Edison, so there was never a need. But as soon as someone was brought in from out of town, and we ran into the problem that he could not cross the township border when there was an emergency, then the need arose to make sure that those on the emergency management team lived here in Edison so that they would be on hand in case of an emergency. Any old day of the week, it doesn't matter perhaps, but when there's an emergency, they need to be here immediately. And to have to travel an hour and a half away, or from the next town, and is not allowed to come across the township line, well, to me, it's a waste having them there. I mean, you could sit and talk about all the strategy you want, but they have to be here for the implementation. They have to be here to make sure that if this group is supposed to go here and that group is supposed to go there, that they do indeed, and they're not doing this. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I will not be supporting this ordinance, Council President. Thank you.
Any other council comments? Mr. Cancro?
Yes, point of clarification for the councilwoman. So not to paraphrase, the need arises when the resignation is submitted. The deputies will report to the new OEM coordinator. The new OEM coordinator will live in Edison. The current OEM coordinator who will become one of the deputies will be living 15 to 20 minutes away. You'll have a body of 4 people. 2 of the 4 will live in Edison and can respond quickly. And again, these are not first responders like Councilwoman Perlstein said. These are people who develop a plan when there's a non-emergency, and then it's handed off to the first responders when there is an emergency.